How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Deciduous Bonsai podcast. I'm Andrew Robson. I'm a bonsai professional who specializes in deciduous trees, and I have with me a student, friend, and relatively new bonsai grower, moderator on the bonsai subreddit page, Maciek.
Hello.
Good morning. Today we're going to talk about a topic that I think you really enjoy, and it's something that we've discussed a lot. You've asked me a lot. So what's our topic today? What's this big question that?
The big question is big leaves.
Big leaves.
Should we care about them? Are they a problem? A lot of people ask this online, and I feel like the answer is more interesting than it seems at first.
No. The answer is straight away no. I don't care. As one of the nation's top deciduous artists, I don't care at all about big leaves. It doesn't even really cross my mind.
Okay, I believe you. I have some reasons to believe.
Do you have some doubts?
I think everybody has some doubts, and
yeah,
I've had some doubts too.
So
but I'm starting to believe because I'm starting to see how it's all coming together, and how it isn't really a problem. I'm seeing it.
Yeah. I mean, for example, behind us, if you're watching this on the Rakuyo's Deciduous Bonsai channel, I have a Coralopsis, a winter hazel. The tree that I won a prize with at the first Expo was a winter hazel. Mm-hmm. And it won Best Deciduous out of a really good group of trees, and it has a huge, ginormous leaf. It's like 5 inches by 5 inches. It's like a kind of size of your palm. And it makes a great bonsai.
But even this year, I've seen it with fairly large leaves. Why is that still not a problem? Why should I not be afraid of them stylistically? Like, what is the actual issue that people are getting at when they are afraid of leaves that are big?
I think it's just, well, on average, if you come to Rakuyo and look at the garden here, you're going to see a lot of big trees. And scale is important when we're talking about this topic. If you're growing shohin, then yeah, maybe big trees, that question does matter more. My answer would be maybe rather than no. Maybe it matters with shohin because we are trying to, in the space of 8 inches, convince someone that you can fit a full-size bonsai and that size constraint. So maybe leaf size and coarseness of the branches matter when we're talking about really small trees, but
they have an influence.
They have an influence, right. But for big and medium trees, it just does not matter. There's also a lot of things that we can do to shrink leaves down, which we'll talk about here shortly. But you said this once to me in a class, like you can ramify anything, and it's true. Like we can put ramification on anything. We can build a beautiful structure on just about anything.
Yeah. So just from that statement, in principle, it should be possible to make a bonsai out of everything that makes internodes smaller than like a foot. I mean, that's a ridiculous notion. That's a ridiculous way to think about it. But at least in principle, you're starting somewhere, and then techniques should be able to pull you even closer.
Yeah,
right?
The art of bonsai is the techniques that we apply to these trees over time, and you can apply those techniques on the things that have ginormous leaves. I have a student who has big leaf maples. The leaf is like the size of my head, and with defoliation and just pop culture, they get down to 2-3 inches. So they're. Yeah, you can ramify anything. You can, assuming the scale is we're working with a large enough tree. This Coralopsis here is a pretty big tree. It's going down to the Expo. It's going to be in the extra large category. So that helps when you have a coarse plant with big leaves. But don't let big leaves stop you from making a good bonsai, because if you're out collecting and you find a species of tree, you find a hazel that has really big leaves, but it has an outstanding trunk, like totally,
it should trump everything.
It trumps everything else.
Yeah. Right.
Beautiful ramification and branch work, beautiful line that you put in these trees trumps everything else. If you're showing your tree at the appropriate time of year, which is winter, then who cares? Like, nobody knows if the leaf was 5 inches or 1 inch or so a lot of these things, to me, as someone who thinks about deciduous bonsai all day, every day, it just doesn't matter. Big leaves just don't matter. I don't have a lot of shohin here, so maybe if I was a shohin professional, I'd feel differently. But for medium and large and extra large trees, it just doesn't matter.
What do you say to people that say, well, I really like the appearance of the leaves. I really like the autumn display. I really like the way the tree looks when it's green. If you like
the autumn display, having a big leaf is going to make more. It's going to have more color, surface area.
Just more to love, right?
Yeah. But I mean, We're entering the best time of year for deciduous bonsai. We're just at the end of summer. Trees are transitioning from green to all their beautiful fall colors. For a deciduous enthusiast like myself and you and a lot of people watching, this is the best time of year for us. Like summer's over. We're getting these beautiful fall colors, and it's leading to the leaves coming off. And then in spring, you get colors kind of all over again.
Yep, yep.
This is like prime time.
It's kind of funny living in the Pacific Northwest. You do come across a lot of people who are like, "Oh no, summer's over. Now we're going to go into 6 months of darkness." And I'm just thinking, man, I'm so excited
I'm
to get
so
working on
excited.
trees and
Yeah,
see the silhouettes that have been hidden behind the leaves for this, this whole time of the growing season. Now I
yeah,
can get to work. Now I can see the fruits of my labor.
that's right.
Is that part of it for you?
It is part of it for me. It's the seasonal transition is really kind of magical. Um, but yeah, it's going back to big leaves. It's just yeah, it's not something that I care about. It's not something that matters. Um, you can ramify anything. You can do nice bonsai work on any plant material.
Hmm.
There's going to be things that are more difficult, and there's actually a lot of trees that have small leaves that are way more difficult to work with than trees that have big leaves, just because how they behave when we.
Extreme density, congestion, things like that.
Yeah,
Definitely
exactly.
themes studied
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so it's just because it has big leaves, it shouldn't stop you from making a nice tree out of it.
I've had the idea in my mind for a while that a big leaf can be a gift, especially for a typical internet bonsai enthusiast where
Yeah.
you want to grow a big trunk really quickly. So some cottonwoods, for example, I'm into cottonwoods, have very big leaves when they are coarser structured,
Hmm.
and they grow really fast at that point.
Yeah.
And then they start to get a little bit finer growth, and then they start to slow down. So I can see that, oh, okay, big leaf, big vigor, smaller leaf, smaller vigor, and I am in control of that narrative over time,
Yeah,
right?
and there's a lot of things that we can do to help shape that narrative, and
Hmm.
we're actually going to give you 5 things in this episode on how you can make big leaves smaller. Because you're never going to make a big leaf just magically small, but you can make any leaf, no matter what size it is, you can make it smaller. Just like you can ramify everything, you can reduce the foliage on everything as well.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, we kind of developed a list of 5 things that we teach here in our classes that help make those things smaller.
Let's
Um,
get into it.
let's get into it.
Number one.
Number one, have more branches. The more ramification you have, the smaller your leaves will be.
What do you mean by ramification?
Ramification is density of fine twigs or branches. It's
So,
it's a
so
weird, like, we made the word up in the bonsai world,
right.
but yeah,
So
it's means
like I
more
have,
fine twigs on our trees.
yeah, I
So the
have a
more
branch with sub branches, with sub branches, sub branches, or however you want to say in terms of your
Yeah, these are the fractals
verbiage.
on our
The
trees. These are
fractals on our trees,
the
right?
fractal patterns. So the more fractals that we have, the more fine twigs and branches that we have, the smaller our leaves are going to be.
Hmm.
Because if you think about it, the pot is a constant. Assuming we like the pot for the tree, our general trajectory for a bonsai is we're adding more and more branches, and we're not always upping the size of the pot. And so if we're keeping the volume of the pot relatively constant,
Hmm.
that all of that energy that the roots are pushing up into the tree, the more we divide all of those outputs, the smaller leaves are going to be, the shorter the internodes are going to be. It's going
Hmm.
to shrink everything down.
Sometimes the way I've described it online is where you have a fixed bowl of milk,
Uh-huh.
and then you have 5 kittens, and they get a certain amount of size.
Yeah,
But if you had 10 kittens with the same bowl of milk,
yeah,
they should be
yeah.
appropriately
They're going to start
smaller,
drinking
right?
less and less the more kittens you add.
Right, right,
I teach it with a hose. Like the second you start put a Y valve on your hose, your pressure's in half, and the more Y valves we put on it, it
right,
starts to
right.
shrink.
And the end of the hose is just dripping directly
Yeah,
down. Yeah.
and that's actually why, if you've seen our video on fertilizer, that's why I fertilize trees like this winter hazel so much, is because we put so many growth tips on these that to keep all of those happy, you actually have to push it. But all of those growth tips, they help dilute the energy of the tree, and that will make smaller leaves. So that's
Mhm.
one of the biggest things that you can do, is just, and that's why time does this so well. And a lot of people notice this, the longer they have a tree, the smaller the internodes get. Just doing bonsai, making a
Just
lot
staying
more,
in the game.
just staying in the
Hmm.
game, staying active, that's going to make your leaf smaller.
I think there's a lot of trust the process there.
Yeah.
right? Because you won't see it in 1 year, but by year 3, you're seeing some ramification on
Yeah,
trees,
bonsai
even
is
by
a
accident.
process game,
Yeah.
and all these things the accumulation of all of these things add up to a bonsai.
So make more branches.
Make more branches. Very much in the same light, number two, how we can make bigger leaves smaller is have more roots. It doesn't
What do
necessarily.
we mean by more roots, though?
Yeah, it doesn't
Like,
mean take your tree and plant it in a container the size of a dumpster. It means within that set volume of your pot, the more roots that you have, the like we said with the branches, what happens on the branches of the tree is very much mimicked by the root system. The more branches that we have, or the more roots that we have, the slower things are going to get down. You could also say that the more pot bound our trees get, the more roots that's growing in there, that's going to help shrink our leaves down too.
I think a lot of growers, even if they're new to the game, they've seen the pot bound tree that's really slowing down. So there's a hint, something going
Yeah.
on there for sure.
Yeah, and in fact, it's oftentimes you repot a tree and it gets really, really strong that year, and then you can like literally watch every year pass. If you take the time to notice these things, you'll get smaller and smaller internodes. Then your internodes get so small that you need to repot the tree because they're too small. And
They're too small. The leaves are too small. They start to pull less on water.
Yeah,
they
yeah.
peter out. See
Yeah.
some branch loss.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So having more roots in the same container pot, not upping the container, but having more roots for a set volume will help make smaller leaves, help slow the energy of the tree down.
Okay. So if I did put my tree in a dumpster-sized pot, I should expect to have bigger leaves again. And maybe that's a choice, right? Maybe I'm doing that on purpose. Like
Maybe you are, yeah. And
maybe I need those big leaves for a little
yeah,
while.
and often if you're a grower and you're just focused on growing the trunk, that's not really conducive to making small leaves at the same time. We have a different set of goals that
Right.
we're working on.
So throughout this discussion, we should remember that these are aspects that are tied to sort of the narrative arc of your tree. Like in the early days, you might be growing and you just don't care about big leaves at all because you want to grow sections of trunk.
Yeah, who cares about big trees or big leaves if you're just growing a trunk? Who cares about big leaves if your tree that's on a 20-year trajectory is in year 3? Like it's just things that to me as a deciduous artist just don't matter. And these 5 things that we're talking about, they're part of the process that just helps reduce the size of the leaf just by doing bonsai.
So if you love your canopy, love your roots, if you're ramifying your canopy, ramify your roots, make it fuzzy above, make it fuzzy below. If you're in that stage of the arc of your tree.
Yeah, all of those things will drastically help.
Right. Okay, make more roots.
Make more roots, make more branches.
Got it.
Those 2 things, shrink down leaf size, shorten internodes.
If we only had those, we'd probably get pretty far, right?
You can get super far just on those 2 things.
I feel like with things like conifers, that's kind of all you have anyway, and so that's kind of what you go with for the most part. There's a bunch of things there. There's things that are similar to deciduous, but you start with those for many years, and it gets you far.
Yeah.
Okay. Next,
number 3. You can manually make the leaves smaller. One of those ways is with something like a winter hazel, like what we have behind us. I can take that leaf that's about the size of my palm, and I can take a scissors and I can cut half of it off.
But wait a minute, though. That sounds ridiculous. Like if I'm a noob, a complete beginner to bonsai, that sounds ridiculous. Like, wait a minute, that's not how bonsai works, right? So you're not making the leaves smaller by cutting them, but you're having an effect from cutting them. Can you explain that?
Yeah,
It's doing something.
It is doing something. So when we take that really big leaf, that leaf is basically a solar panel. Right. And if we cut half of that solar panel or leaf off, that solar panel is now operating at 50% less energy. So every leaf on a broadleaf plant is attached to a petiole, which is attached to a bud at the base of the branch. And so wherever there's a leaf, there's always going to be a bud.
And what effect does that leaf have on that bud?
The leaf is the solar panel for that particular bud.
So they're matched together.
Yeah, so if we take that leaf, we cut it in half, that bud is now getting 50% less energy production. It's getting 50% less power. Yeah, and that's the future.
Right.
That's what's either going to grow when we prune it or after dormancy when spring comes around next year. And so by taking the leaf, by cutting it, what I'm doing is I'm making that solar panel smaller, I'm making that bud have a lot less energy, and then the next time that bud grows, it's going to be weaker. And so, and from that weakness, then you're maybe getting smaller internodes and shorter needs from that. Right. Doing a lot of these things that we talk about in deciduous, just doing them once, isn't going to have a profound difference, but the process,
Yeah,
doing
more
them.
of the trust the process.
Yeah, doing the process over and over again, that's where you see the result. And we certainly see that with the leaf cutting, with taking a big leaf and just cutting it off. And the nice thing about leaf cutting is that you can do this on any single broadleaf tree, and it will work. You could do it for broadleaf evergreens even, and it works just fine. So it's a kind of a tried and true technique that works for every species of tree and every stage of development. Will never harm your tree.
So leaf cutting is just, to my understanding, kind of a tip of an iceberg, and it's the mildest tip of that iceberg, right?
Yeah.
It's the safest one of the ways of reducing the energy of the tree
Yeah.
to affect the future buds. There are other ways, though, right? We can go way crazier, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a certain species at a certain age with a certain vigor, like a trident maple that's relatively young in its development and it's really vigorous, you could take that trident maple and you can cut the entire leaf off. We call that full defoliation. And so if you fully cut off 100% of the leaves on 100% of the tree, they will regrow smaller, because if we go back to that same logic of leaf cutting, at the base of every one of those leaves that we were cutting off completely, there's a bud there. And so we're forcing that bud to grow a new branch where we previously just had one leaf.
Right, because removing leaves is a stress, and stress causes bud break or some kind of, it motivates the tree to do something.
Yeah, and that brings us back to number one on our list, because when we're fully defoliating, we are making more branches. And when we have more branches, then we obviously get smaller leaves. So a lot of these things do tie in together and kind of compound.
It's a system of thinking.
But yeah, we can use defoliation techniques. We can use leaf cutting to manually kind of reduce the size of the leaf in one season, and that will have a compound effect the more we do them to help shrink leaves.
So if we just had those first three things, we would get really far. Now we have a really nice system.
Yeah, but now we can add a few more things to that list, those tools that you can have in your toolbox. All these things together really help shrink leaf size down.
So I feel like the next couple items are going to be kind of like dialing it in and kind of acting more professional.
Yeah.
So the next one
is sun exposure, and this is one that
surprising.
It's surprising. It's one that, depending on where you live, can be challenging. We'll talk about that. But what it is, number 4, is it's full sun in the spring when the leaf is growing, or just more light when the leaf is growing in general.
So when you first told me this, my intuition was, oh, right, of course, because if a leaf is there's too much shade or in the dark, it tends to get really big or etiolated, or I don't know how to pronounce it, but basically it gets really big looking for light. Really elongated looking for light. Is this kind of the opposite of that, or is there more to it?
No, that's exactly it. It's like if in the spring, when my Japanese maples are breaking bud, coming out of dormancy, if I have a batch of them in 50% shade cloth, I have a batch of them in 80% shade cloth, and I have a batch of them in full sun. The full sun ones are going to have smaller leaves, by a mile. The more shade cloth we add, or the more less light that we have, the bigger the leaves are going to be. And you see this oftentimes with a lot of trees growing in greenhouses too. The leaf will be bigger. The structure is quite a bit more coarse and massive.
Especially as like a couple weeks into the growing season, you're starting to make extensions, and those extensions are like goofy long.
Yeah, so really, really, really important, if you want small leaves, if you want short internodes, have your trees wake up outside in the full light, in the full sun, in the spring. Once we get high temperatures, above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, that's when you can put up shade cloth and protect your trees. But throughout all of winter, and especially in spring, we want full sun so that our trees can grow really small leaves.
Okay, that works.
But it doesn't just apply to winter. It could be in the summer too. So if you have that trident that you fully defoliated,
right, because you're starting a new set of extensions.
You're starting a new set of leaves.
Right.
In the summertime, it doesn't matter as much. It could still be under 50% shade cloth, but because we're in summer, the sun is way more intense. The amount of photons, our photosynthetic photon flux density, is way higher.
It's off the charts.
It's off the charts. Yeah, in summer it's much less critical. But where most people fail in this at home is they have their trees leaf out in a shaded environment. And that's can be from mismanaged winter storage. If you live in a very cold place, I just got back from working in Minnesota,
Hmm.
and so people are using cold frames in their garage. Their garage is too cold, so they're using a container inside their garage to keep their trees warm. If it gets too warm, if you don't manage the temperature well, if it too many days above 40 and that thing heats up, it could leaf out
Start
your
to
trees.
push.
Yeah, your
Yeah.
trees leaf out in February and they can't go outside until April. And so the leaf is number one, forming in an environment with almost no wind
Hmm.
or air circulation, so they can get fried just from the wind going outside. And the light, it's going to grow a huge leaf because it's growing up in a really low light
It's gonna
environment.
grow a big, weak leaf.
Super weak leaf.
Right.
And a lot of people who have cold storage, if you don't keep your cold storage cold enough, your trees wake up too early, they go outside and they get fried in the spring.
Hmm.
And a few years of that can really set a tree back.
I guess on the other extreme, things are pretty easy, right? Because you have your shade cloth. If the tree can exist in your climate with shade cloth in the middle of the summer, then it would easily be able to exist in spring and without shade cloth.
That's right.
So if you're in like Arizona or something, you should be able to go
Yeah.
full sun in the spring, no problem, right?
Yeah, and ideally you're full sun in the spring wherever you live. It's just a lot of these things are so interconnected that if you mess up your winter care, then your spring uh, strategy of having them in the full sun gets all messed up.
Hmm.
So it's a lot of things in bonsai are really interconnected that way.
Yeah, that's an unexpected one, but a cool one, and it definitely works out. It definitely seems to work in my experience so far. Is that first flush looks much tighter in full sun.
Yeah. No,
Um,
it's important. We run into the challenge here in the Pacific Northwest of if we have too many cloudy days, um, because we're still in our rainy season, it could be problematic certain years. So
mhm.
we're a little bit of the luck of the draw with whatever the weather's doing.
From year
But
to
that's
year.
why it's even more important to have your trees in full sun if you live in a place that has a lot of cloudy days in spring, because you might not get full sun every day.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
All right, that's a pretty good one. So full sun in spring.
yeah, our last one is having a sacrifice branch.
This is also super unexpected to me, but the longer that I'm in bonsai, the more it makes sense. So explain what a sacrifice branch is and why does it help with making smaller leaves?
Yeah, a sacrifice branch is a branch that we grow on the tree in order to thicken something. And we often let it grow very disproportionately from the rest of the size of
Just
the
a
tree.
big long telephone pole sticking out of the top
Yeah,
of the
maybe
tree
you
is what
have
we're
a
talking about,
bonsai
right?
that's 1 foot tall and all the branches really tiny on it, and you have this massive branch growing out at the top of it that's 6 feet tall.
Hmm.
And its leaves can actually be a lot bigger, which is kind of a fun thing to see. But yeah, just having a sacrifice branch, having a huge bit of foliar mass, a big huge bit of vascular tissue on the tree, having that
All that
can,
length.
yeah, all
Yeah.
that length, all that
Storage
vigor
space for
is
sugars.
just a
Yeah.
drain from
Hmm.
everything else. We talked about having more branches being a drain.
Hmm.
If you have more branches in terms of one really big massive branch that's half of your foliage on the entire bonsai, then that's going to drain everything else kind of down below it. So
So I've noticed something very interesting with sacrifice branches done the way that our school of study does them, where especially with conifers, but also with deciduous, amazingly with alders and things like that, where on the sacrifice branch, if I keep the structure of the sacrifice branch very coarse and simple, not a
mhm.
lot of sub-branching, basically the opposite of have more branches,
Yeah, you
then
call this poodling, right?
poodling, right?
Poodling,
Then the tip,
which means make it look like a poodle tail. You strip all the branches
exactly,
in the middle, have a lot
like
of
a
fluff at
telephone
the end.
pole with a bushy thing at the end, but
Yeah.
the leaves on the end of this telephone pole will be massive.
Hmm.
Meanwhile, the leaves in the rest of the tree where I'm making
Yeah, and
branches,
even the
tiny.
candles. Like
In the
if you
same
have a
tree.
pine, you could have like huge candles up top and then
Yep.
really tiny candles down low.
Yeah, that's an amazing thing to go through as a grower for the first time, because in your mind, like, it's a direct visual example that the intellectual part of talking about making branches, making smaller leaves is right there on one tree, demonstrated two facets, right? Where you have the big leaves on the coarse part of the tree,
Yeah,
fine leaves on the very fine part of the tree.
yeah.
All you did was just make sure you were using ramification techniques to make it detailed in one part and keeping it very simple in the other part.
Yeah, it's a huge energy drain on a tree. It can even be too much of an energy drain. So we're often having to step on the gas or the brakes on that sacrifice branch to affect what's going on the bottom of the tree. So if the bottom of your tree, if you have Japanese maple and the internodes are 2 millimeters, then you probably need to cut some more of the sacrifice branch off.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're about to start experiencing some twig loss. If if it's not strong enough, then it's not thickening in, and it's not doing what we want. It's not making smaller leaves. So we might do less poodling, keep more foliar mass on top. So we're always kind of adjusting how much we're doing based on what we're seeing down low and compared to what we're trying to do.
So I guess much like with other things in bonsai where we're messing with vigor, or we're trying to step on the gas pedal, we probably should make sure to stay on top of it and not let it go too crazy for too many seasons, because that'll also kind of work in the opposite direction of what we want to do.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I mean, those 5 things: having more branches, having more dense roots, manually cutting the leaves either off completely with full defoliation or cutting a part of the leaf off with leaf cutting. Having full sun in the spring, and having a big sacrifice branch if the tree needs it. Obviously not every tree needs a sacrifice branch, but the trees that don't need sacrifice branches probably have smaller leaves to begin with because they have everything else going on.
So you're saying sacrifice branches kind of start to kind of fall into the background as a tree gets more and more
you don't
mature.
see many kokofu trees with sacrifice branches.
Right.
So,
and if you did, that must mean they're resetting it or something. Or
something's going on.
They're doing something big, yeah.
So yeah, just all these 5 things together can make a big leaf plant like a big leaf maple or a Corylopsis or a magnolia can have much kind of smaller leaves and much more tolerable for what we're doing. And then, like we said, these are deciduous, so the leaf falls off half of the year anyway. So,
right. As long as the internodes are nice, maybe the big leaves are all right.
Big leaves can work for bonsai.
And we have seen big leaf maple leaves that are smaller than an American 25-cent coin at this point. So we know in principle that they are possible.
It's definitely possible.
And that's down from a 2-foot
Well, and speaking about what's possible, if you want to know what's possible, you're almost never going to see the same size leaf identically on every single leaf on a tree. You're always going to see a variation. So look at the variation and look at the smallest leaves. If you see a leaf that's 1 inch and the rest of the leaves are 5 inches, you know that small inch, that 1 inch one is possible.
Especially if it's late summer. Like I've seen big leaf maple just on the ground in my neighborhood that's got tiny leaves, so I know
it's possible. And if you do those 5 things that we talked about, that's going to really help you get there.
Right. That sounds, so this whole list sounds like a bunch of do's. Things to do.
Well, bonsai, like you always tell me, bonsai is action. Like
it is action.
Bonsai is action. It's not just sitting at home with a glass of wine watching your tree make itself a bonsai. Like bonsai are made by someone doing something and doing something a lot.
If you trust the process, if you trust the process, there has to be a process. In other words.
Yeah.
So what about bad things? Like what about the don'ts? Like the things that we shouldn't be.
There are some things that you shouldn't do that can make big leaves. We could starve our trees. So if you don't fertilize your trees at all, you will have small leaves. And that will work to a point. And when it doesn't start working, you start losing a lot of branches, getting dieback on your tree for no reason.
And then you're juggling a lot of issues that have nothing to do with any of this and just become really difficult.
So limiting fertilizer or restricting fertilizer completely will make smaller leaves, but it can also cause harm to the tree.
So in the narrative arc from field to table, right?
Farm to table.
From farm to display table, there's no time at which you say, we're going to starve this tree of nutrients. We're always...
So some people do that in their practice. I don't like doing that in my practice because we have all these other 5 things that we can do in our toolbox. I don't see a need to put the tree at any risk.
Right. We've proven out that the high nutrition method can produce beautiful ramification.
That's right.
So we're good for that.
Yep.
And that's just
I fertilize my trees every single day in the growing season, and it doesn't have an effect on leaf size.
Okay. What else? What other bad things should we not
Just
be
like
doing?
restricting fertilizer, you can restrict water. I mean, if we look at the photosynthetic equation, we need nutrients and we need water and we need sun, which we get for free. But restricting water can really reduce our leaf size. We see this with pine trees with like needles growing in the spring. The needles can get pretty long, and that can really limit the, the the growth. So you can definitely. We have a MMA match going on here with the two dogs. um, no, restricting water, we can starve our trees with nutrients and with moisture
Right.
to a smaller leaf.
And we go out to the mountains sometimes, and we see trees that are growing in really, really like poor soil. Like
Yeah,
the technical term I think is poor soils.
yeah.
And
You
you
go.
can see needles getting smaller, you can see leaves getting smaller, and that's like,
Yep.
oh, maybe I should do that. But
Well, it can
that's
trick you too. You go up and you find that vine maple, and it's got like 1 inch leaves on it. You're like, ooh, this is
yeah.
special genetic or something.
Take it down
You
to the
collect it,
domestic.
bring it
Yeah.
home, put it in a box, and fertilize it, and all of a sudden, the leaves are
Right.
nice and big again.
Right. That's another hint, right? That it's all a
Yeah,
function of
yeah,
how much water is moving through the system, how much space you have in the pot.
that's right.
I've noticed that if I have a tree that was very, very, I've noticed that effect basically. That if I
Yeah.
have a very, very weak tree, that as soon as I put it in a big basket with coarse pumice, it just runs
Yep.
and leaves get bigger and everything gets bigger, and I lose the magic of whatever I saw in the mountain.
Yeah.
And it's all related that way.
Yeah. So yeah, just by limiting moisture, by limiting fertilizer, you can starve your trees into smaller leaves, but we're doing it at the expense of the health of the tree. And you can get away doing that for actually a fair bit of time. You can get away doing that for 3, 4, 5 years. I even know someone who does that for 10, 15 years.
Right. It's
Um,
walking a tightrope, though, isn't
it's
it?
walking a tightrope because it's not making your ramifications sustainable. When you tend to do that, your branches will throw a lot more. You get a lot more twig and branch loss, um, and it's like I said, just putting the overall tree at risk to do that. So there's so many other things that we can do with our action in bonsai that we
Right.
can shrink leaves that don't kind of require putting the tree at risk.
Yeah, always try to grow a bulletproof tree that can go through extremes and
Yeah.
is ready for more bonsai work. That's
That's
the way I
right.
think about it, right?
So you can ramify anything. You can make beautiful line and fractal patterns on anything. Now there are probably big leaf coarse plants that might not work for bonsai. It's probably not because of the leaf size though. It's probably because of the growth habit.
Hmm.
That's what I wish people would worry about more. Is not leaf size. It's growth habit. Is how do these branches develop over time? How do these lines get put into the tree?
Hmm.
That matters much more.
Good structure again, going back, right? As if we were looking in the woods and we saw a
Yeah,
big leafed, beautiful, awesome trunk that we would love to dig up. I mean,
yeah,
still get it,
yeah,
but
yeah,
follow the vibe of the tree
yeah.
from there on.
That's
You
right.
have to,
That's right.
right?
So yeah, ramify anything. You can make big leaves smaller on any single bonsai. Don't let that stop you.
Hmm. Hopefully, we can show some examples of big leaf maple in the coming years.
Yeah, it'd be fun to see more of these big leaf plants. Magnolia is one that works well for bonsai. We have good examples of it. Why don't we see more magnolia for bonsai? I'm talking about deciduous ones like the star magnolia
Hmm.
or Magnolia liliflora. These are great trees. They have a big leaf. Coralopsis, like
Yeah.
you can look in every kokofu book and probably find at least one or two Coralopsis. Why don't we have more winter hazels for
Yeah,
bonsai?
the winter hazel is really interesting because some of the internodes on the tree are like smaller than some of the internodes I get on my Japanese maples, which
Yeah,
are supposed to be perfect for this
that
and
have a
have the
leaf
small
like
leaf. Yeah,
1/4 the size of this.
yeah. I mean, how? And then I realized ramification because it's
Yeah.
self-evident.
This tree
Yeah,
has a lot of branches. It has a
yeah.
lot of roots. It gets full sun in the spring, so it's getting this formula that we talked about.
Hmm. Trust the process.
It's just a process. Do you think we covered the topic? Do you think we beat this over the head pretty well?
I think
Um,
so.
I just don't want people to be scared of big leaves because as a deciduous artist who's constantly acquiring material for myself and students,
Hmm.
it's just not a factor that I really think about.
Right, and it gets to the heart of how bonsai works. It's our responsibility to make the structure, not nature's. We're not
Yeah,
waiting for nature to make a bonsai for us in the pot.
yeah,
We're doing
yeah.
it, right? And it's specific things that are in real life, and professionals have dedicated their time to figuring out.
That's right.
So,
And generations of people have dedicated their life to figure out. So that's why we have a lot of big leaves that are on species that people were growing 100, 200 years ago because they still work well for bonsai. So
Yeah, even black pine. I mean, black pine.
black pine has a huge.
Yeah.
We didn't figure out how to make the needle small on black pine until like 80 years ago when decandling was
Yeah.
invented.
And I would argue this is one of those things where I think over time we'll talk about the cross pollination of ideas between conifers and deciduous. But
Yeah,
this is one of those.
that sounds like a whole episode.
It sounds like a deciduous idea bleeding into conifers.
That's
Like,
right.
oh, that's how that could work.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
you could argue on a conifer, it's much more important to have small foliage because when we appreciate them is when they're in foliage because
Which
that's
is
every
always-
time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point.
So on deciduous, you know, this thing has huge leaves. You can't see the trunk in the summer. Who cares? Like winter's here. Like
Right.
time to appreciate the branches.
Yeah, and if we're doing a good job of growing, we should have big bushy extensions on the tree. We shouldn't be able to see the silhouette in the summer, right?
Well, that's some
if we're doing it right.
it's a common thing when you have a non-deciduous person judge deciduous trees in an exhibit, and they could be a professional who makes wonderful, beautiful trees. But when non-deciduous people judge deciduous trees, and most of our shows happen to be in the summer for some reason rather than the winter, they come up to deciduous trees and they say you need to cut a lot of these branches out to see the trunk. That's like the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
Right.
The thing that they should be saying is this show should be in December, not in September. Like that's the thing.
That's
that
when
we
the
should
payoff is. That's when you see that beautiful structure.
Yeah, because this is what we're building. Like it's a seasonal thing, and it's a beautiful way to live your life when you're, you know, changing based on the seasons and
Yep.
living according to the seasons.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
All right. Well,
Agreed.
you've been watching the Deciduous Bonsai podcast on Rakuyo's Deciduous Bonsai channel. I'm Andrew. I have my co-host Maciek with me. We'll see you for the next episode.